All right. Merry Christmas, everybody. We are kicking off a new series for Christmas. So at Seacoast, during our weekend church services after Thanksgiving this year at each of our campuses and at live.seacoast.org for church online, 4 of our teaching pastors are teaching a message based on a popular Christmas movie. And because Christmas is in the air and movies are fun to talk about, we got each of those pastors to come into the podcast studio to talk about the sermon they delivered for the At the Movies teaching series.
So fun.
You like Christmas movies?
I love Christmas movies. They make me happy.
Yeah, heck yeah.
All of them.
Heck yeah. Hallmark movies? You like those?
I do like Hallmark movies.
See, I
have to be in the
those.
mood for those because they're a little cheesy, but I like them. I was doing it just the other day, just watching a little, but I never got to finish it, so I still don't know how it ends.
Oh, gotcha.
Probably should finish that one. So.
If it's a Hallmark movie, you could probably
I think
write
I know
the
what's going to happen. That's all right. I'll get to it. But yeah, so for the month of December, there will be sermons based on the following movies: Home Alone 1, It's a Wonderful Life, Elf, and The Grinch. The old cartoon, so that's not technically a movie, Joey.
Not technically a movie. You're right.
So
you're right.
Who picked that one?
Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to go higher up to ask.
Yeah, I would.
Which one's your favorite out of all those?
Which do you think?
I'm going to guess Elf.
Yes. Yes, it is.
So would you take it as a compliment if I said that if they ever made an Elf Part 2 and there was the need for a long-lost sister of Will Ferrell's, you would be perfect?
I would be honored, and it has been a lifelong dream of mine to literally, I want to play Elf. I keep looking to see when there's going to be an audition so I can play Elf.
When I'm around you during the holidays, it feels like you're a real-life Buddy the Elf.
Thank you. I sincerely love that. That makes my heart so happy. We all should have a little bit of Elf, right? A little bit.
Heck yeah. So along the way in this Christmas podcast series, you'll also hear from some of the Seacoast podcast host crew. We talked about all sorts of stuff, morals around eating during the holidays. We talk about some sacrifices people may want to consider making this year during this festive time. We got some time with our lead pastors, which was cool. And we continue our traditional Christmas trivia championship. It's our second year doing this.
Yes, let's
We get
go.
to see if the campus pastor team can defend their title.
Do you think they will?
I think so.
They're pretty smart.
Yeah.
I was pretty impressed.
Yeah.
If you don't ask me about Christmas movies or Christmas songs, I pretty much don't know anything.
Yeah.
So. One of these Christmas episodes, you and I are also going to tell folks about some episodes we have planned for early next year.
Mm-hmm.
Also, we have a new podcast feed for paying supporters of this podcast. It's called Things That You Won't Hear on the Podcast.
Yeah, you get it?
I get it. Yeah. So it's very tricky.
Exclusive content.
Yes, it sounds like all the things I want to know. There's already exclusive content available for you right now when you subscribe. Conversations will be on when is Jesus coming back? Great question. Pushback we've received about this podcast, and zombies written about in the New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that.
Mm-hmm. No, now's not the time.
Not the time? You want to give me a hint?
No. People rose from the dead when Jesus rose from the dead.
Okay.
It's in the Gospels. It's weird, and we
Okay.
just read right over it.
Okay.
We just read right over
I'm
it.
interested.
Zombies in the New Testament.
I'm intrigued.
Yes, we now have an opportunity for you to support this podcast, and supporters will also get access to some live streams when we record and other perks that we'll be telling you more about soon. But all of the money that we bring in from supporters of the podcast will help Seacoast ministry efforts in local prisons.
That's
Now,
awesome.
Next episode, you'll meet fellow Seacoaster Jim Wright, who's our point person in these ministry efforts. He's doing great work. We can't wait to use this podcast to help him in his efforts.
Here's a quick collection of audio representative of some of the content that you can get now if you join. If you're watching us on YouTube right now, there's a link to this commercial in the show notes. We won't be playing it here since there's no video.
So we've got this podcast patron membership discounted for the rest of the year.
That's awesome.
Get in there now by clicking Be a Patron of the Podcast.
Right now.
You can gift a subscription to a loved one for a Christmas present. And please write us at podcast@seacoast.org if you want to join, but you just can't afford it right now.
Oh, that's so nice.
Yeah.
Well, right now, it's some of the host crew talking lots of random things about Christmas, including ways they'd like to grow during the holidays, and how Jack doesn't like the question, what's God teaching you? Then it's our lead pastor to talk about the movie Elf.
Does that surprise you that Jack was bothered by a type of question?
Not at all. He looks for that kind of stuff, doesn't he?
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Bye.
Merry Christmas, everybody. Hey, we're here with Lynn Stroy, Roy Jakes, Jack Hoy, Tamilix Copeland, and we get you guys 4 weeks in a row. It's going to be fun.
Come on.
Christmas
4
stuff.
weeks.
You were just you just asked all of us about the white chocolate Christmas Little Debbie cakes as opposed to the chocolate ones.
Yeah.
And I told you that I preferred white, and you gave me a look of disgust.
Oh,
just because that was a bad choice?
Yeah.
100%.
Bad choice.
Disgusting. Yes.
And you were saying that what was superior? I just want to catch our listeners
when
up
it comes to Reese's. So like Reese's, at Easter they have the eggs, at Christmas they have the trees. And I just think that the white chocolate of those is superior.
But the most important thing you said is white chocolate's not chocolate.
I guess, yeah, you know what? Laura explained this to me years ago because Laura bakes all the time. I guess
you had to throw somebody else's name in just in case there's something inaccurate.
No, I do. I'm citing my source. See, Joey, when people know something that didn't originate with them, they cite their source. No, she explained it to me, but I can't remember what the deal is because it like has to do with the composition.
Yeah.
I guess like it's technically not chocolate.
Which is why when you eat white chocolate, it leaves a film. It leaves like a film in your mouth.
What?
So you don't like any white chocolate? You don't like any white chocolate?
No, I don't like white chocolate.
Peppermint bark?
No.
That's disgusting.
Neither one of y'all like any white chocolate.
See, I could actually do that.
I mean, if there is nothing else, if I'm craving something sweet and I'm around people and they have nothing else, I probably would just have it. But I have friends who have a saying that they're like, well, if I were on Survivor, I would eat it. But otherwise, that's how I feel about white
chocolate. I'm talking like the one that
Peppermint
has like both milk chocolate and white chocolate with the peppermint. Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
All
right. So for the next 4 weeks on the podcast, well, let me back up. Do y'all all like the Elf movie?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ditto.
Eh?
Wow.
Y'all are the first. I was just going to say, I don't think I've ever met anyone who was iffy about Elf. Everybody likes Elf.
I would also say I am not that kind of comedy person. So typically any kind of movie with like that kind of comedy, I'm just like, it's not my thing. This is over the top.
Mm-hmm.
He's a grown man. Why in these movies does like a normal woman fall in love with like
a grown man that's a 3-year-old?
It's a movie. It's a movie.
Because a lot of guys need hope.
I can't suspend
Well, here's what's kind of crazy about Elf is Chris Farley was one of the original considerations for that character. So imagine Chris Farley that would have been pretty crazy. But I think the movie came out in 2004. Chris Farley died in 1997.
That's what I was going to say.
But it was written a long time ago. He was one of the original considerations. Jon Favreau, who wrote the movie, is actually the doctor who checks a DNA test. That's the guy. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And he's the voice of the bye, buddy.
No way.
Your dad. That's Jon Favreau. Yeah. Well, I would like to. I asked. I don't think I told you this because you were late, Jack.
I was late.
It's okay, man. Everybody's late sometimes. Are you insecure about that? About being late? No?
No.
That's cool. Well, I have not told you this, but I was going to ask all of these guys, like, what is one area in which they would like to grow during this holiday season? It can be something as practical as, hey, how I spend my time. I don't want to be as busy. Hey, I actually want to keep track of finances, something on the practical side. It could be a little more on the spiritual side. But I thought that we would kick this off by a funny conversation. It was funny to me, conversation you and I had one time about people who will ask, what is God teaching you these days? And how annoying. I just thought it was a really funny take, how annoyed you are at that question. And it was really eye-opening. I'll tell y'all what brought this conversation up is I was at like just a casual get-together. It was like a kid's birthday party, and this guy, he's a Christian, probably 20 years younger than me. And I mean, I don't... We all struggle with pride, but I'm not like this prideful guy of like, I've been a Christian way longer. I'm not going to engage in this kind of, but it really is kind of off-putting when someone who doesn't know you at all in a party situation, just kind of like chilling, hanging out. What's God teaching you these days? I'm like, did you just ask that? Like, we're about to cut the cake here, but we talked about that, and you don't even like that question at all. And
No.
do you even remember why? 'Cause
Oh yeah,
I remember.
I talk about this all the time.
Every week during response time.
So
the pastor's like,
Jack's like, here we go
Yeah.
again.
what's God saying, and what are you going to do with it? Jack's like,
Yeah.
dadgummit.
the whole idea is like, what's God doing in your life right now? Like that's the specific formulation I really don't like. Like, what's God doing in your life right now? My view is I don't know, and you don't either. It's like when I look back, then I can see, oh, I understand what he was trying to do, or I understand how he was working. But the idea is like, oh, I know what God's doing in my life right now. It's like, oh, like good for you, I guess. Like, teach me. Like how is God prompting you in response to a message? Like in response time, it's like that, fine. But like what's God doing in your life? It's like there are people in the Bible that God shows up and they don't know who he is, but I'm supposed to know what God's doing in my life. Right? It's like, no, you don't. You understand when you look back and you can see, oh, this tied to this and this tied, because from my perspective, it seems like a lot of the time, God spends his time doing things that I would rather he not do or do later or do differently. But am I supposed to understand all of that right now? I don't. And, the idea that we can understand how God works in our lives in the moment, pretty much never is how I feel about that. And if you're really trying to I have to understand what he's doing right now, well, you're probably going to miss what he's actually doing.
Yeah. I will say, and
I don't know why you wanted to rant on a Christmas episode, but I guess you're the podcast expert.
First of all, yeah, it's weird because it's personal. And you don't do that. Well, maybe some people do because they don't have boundaries. But I'm like, why would I answer if I knew? Why would I answer that to someone that you don't even know my first name?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would I share the intimate details of what God's doing in my life with a complete stranger?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's weird.
Yeah. Well, I'll kick it off by saying, I was thinking about this question and an area in which I want to grow as the holidays approach. And it's crazy, but the word re-enchanted came to my head. And I probably have to give props to John Mark McMillan with that, because he talks about being re-enchanted. It's kind of like a word that he's been playing around with a lot. But just the re-enchantedness of really slowing down and pausing and thinking, whoa, Christmas, we're celebrating God coming from heaven and becoming human.
Mm-hmm.
Like, of course, I've known that my whole life, but I thought about it and I was like, outside of obviously being at a Christmas service where we're being prompted to really reflect and think, I don't do enough of that during the holidays. I just don't. And so I think that's one thing that I want to do consistently throughout the holidays, is to kind of have that on the forefront. So almost like a mental keeping something in check for the better. So that's me. How about you, T?
I'd have to say keep the main thing. I struggle sometimes not getting caught up in the materialistic, worldly portion of Christmas. Like, I'm a gift giver. I love buying things for my family. I love watching them open gifts. And I know for a fact that oftentimes I spend more time trying to make sure that they're loved via gift than teaching them the true meaning of Christmas.
Yeah. Roy?
Well, mine's more of an area that I don't want to grow in.
Yeah.
And that's physically.
Yeah.
So last week attempted to start eating better. So I actually have a goal of actually losing weight during the holiday season.
Dang.
So,
that's audacious. I think a lot of us can relate to the whole wanting to get in shape and that sort of thing. And this would be the one time not to turn any sort of like big time corners. Why right before the holidays? Because you want to be super serious about it?
Well, I think two reasons. Number one, it's just physically frustrating where I'm at. Number two, I think it just hit. I mean, as it has before, but it just kind of re-hit me recently. As I'm dealing with people every day who have discipline struggles in so many other areas, and in the way that I would expect and think that they should be able to find freedom in those areas, I'm like, again, what kind of hypocrite am I that I can't overcome and find freedom in the area that this area for me? You know what I'm saying? So
like, how can you teach someone else discipline?
yeah. Or how can I teach somebody else? How can I encourage how can I help somebody else have hope and faith that they can overcome alcohol or drugs or any other addiction type thing when I myself aren't an example of that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it was just kind of a personal challenge for me recently, like, just to kind of practice what I preach in terms of, I really do believe that this is an area, it's just as much of an addiction thing as anything for me, an addiction to sugar and sweets and non-white chocolate.
Amen.
All you gotta do is put some white chocolate Reese's in your house. Boom,
Never
there you
want to
go.
touch them. Never want to touch them.
What do y'all think about the morality behind food that we intake, especially during the holidays? Because I have found, I will sometimes eat an excess of sweets to where I don't feel good.
Yeah.
And that food never runs out, and there's somebody brought this over and going to, grandma's and she made this, and it's like constant to where sometimes I'm eating sugar and I'm not even hungry and I'm just making myself feel even worse. Now, I also think that there is a lifestyle of unhealthy eating as opposed to like feasting and celebration. So I also don't feel like during the holidays I need to eat exactly how I eat on a regular basis. There is something to splurging and celebrating. But I'm curious, like, do you guys think about eating along Roy's already spoken, but do y'all think about eating in holidays as far as, I probably should do something in a certain way that's God honoring to the temple of the Holy Spirit that he's given me, sort of thing?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I enjoy feasting. I think that there's nothing wrong with that. And so I think it's my personal self-control of like, I'm going to try everything the aunts make, but what's my portion size in that? But when family comes together, and throughout all of human history, it's just like life happens around the table. And so I think that there is something about certain times where you have a feast versus just eating because you have to eat to survive. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it comes down to we could have leftovers for a week and that would be fine. We don't have to eat it all in 3 days. And so I don't think it's a matter of it's wrong for us to have a feast, but what does that feast look like? What's my portion size on my plate? Am I just eating mindlessly? But like sitting around the table, and sometimes it's like snacking all day. Like we might start Thanksgiving dinner at like 2, but it's out all day long, and so it's like there's no, like at 2 we all serve, but we might be munching on whatever's out for the rest of the evening, late into the night. It's the time when all the aunts and uncles are together. And so I think it's sweet to have family together, and cultures find life around the table. But I just think that gluttony piece is a personal, and are we wasting food? Are we throwing things away? Are we not content with what we have? Or are we just like making a feast and then we eat leftovers for the next week or so?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm on both of you. Probably could stand to lose a couple 50 pounds. But I know that, like for Thanksgiving or Christmas, people come to my house and it's a feast, and it is
Mom and them.
Mom and them. If Mom and them were alive, Mom and them would be in my house. Absolutely. But it's a time for us all to get together. And I mean, I just think about Jesus, and there's lots of times in the Bible when he was just having feasts and getting to know one another. And I, if I don't do nothing like Jesus, I got that down. Like, there's always a spread and everyone's welcome. And yeah, sometimes it goes a little too far. Sometimes you eat, 6 plates and you should only have 2.
Mm.
But nothing's going to waste. So that part I ain't worried about.
So I'm curious with you, do you continue your intermittent fasting throughout the holidays? Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it's like
Tell people a snapshot. You started doing that, 8, 9 years ago?
2017.
2017. So about 7 years ago, you started intermittent fasting, which basically for you, and you eat suppers.
Yeah, I eat 1 meal a day. Yeah.
And around 7?
Yeah, a little bit later than that, but yeah.
Yeah. And pretty much anything you want.
No. So that's how it started. Because when I started, kind of my thing was, it's like you're just kind of really like why are you doing it now? Like it'd be extra hard now. But one of the things I kind of realized when I started was it needs, whatever I do, it needs to be harder than it has to be.
Yeah.
Because like part of my problem is discipline. It's not just a eating problem. It's I am a profoundly undisciplined person in this area. And so I actually need something that is harder than it has to be. Because a big part of the correction I need to make isn't just in my body, it's in my mind. And so I really need like extra difficult training, if that makes sense, to like kind of have this big course correction. And so it started out with I need something pass fail. Because it's like, if it's portions, like that's useless. Because if I have a good day, the next day I'd be like, hey, yesterday was a good day. What's a little bit more?
Mm-hmm.
Like we've already established that I'm an undisciplined slob. So let's not put the trust in me to manage this thing. So I felt like it needs to be a pass fail. And did you eat is a really easy question to answer. And so the basically what I decided was, okay, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna have 1 meal a day, but no rules about what that 1 meal is. And that's kind of how I got into this thing of like, okay, so this is a thing that I can live with. I don't hate my life. And once I got used to that, then over the next few years, I started really paying attention. Okay, but what am I eating?
Yeah.
And so now I actually eat really pretty healthy and pretty clean almost all the time. And actually what I was going to say about this discussion is like, for me, like to me, gluttony is not about eating too much. Gluttony is really about, your relationship with food is about selfish indulgence, at which point it's no really longer about food at all. And
living
that's
to eat as opposed to eating to live, sort of thing.
Kind of, but also so here's it's like I did a race at the end of August, and I went like real hard. The beginning of this year. Well, the race was supposed to be in April, and then we had to move it. And so when we came to time to move the race, like I just had this crisis, like I can't do what I've been doing for another 3 months. But then I did. But by the end of it, like I was in the best shape I've ever been in my life, and I was also miserable. And I was kind of like, to Lars, like, I can't do this like one more day past the race. Like, I was like, just vegetables and protein, water. Like, again, like I'm, really, and I wasn't unhealthy, but it was kind of like I'm miserable. And now I had a goal in mind, but after the race, I have really kind of struggled with coming out of that. And, because it's like it feels like I am not doing something I'm supposed to be doing by changing what I'd really gotten used to over this past year, even though I'm not enjoying life in a different way. So like actually that relationship with food kind of became unhealthy in the sense of like, yeah, I had a purpose for it, but it's like, hey, I got to get out of that because that's actually not a healthy relationship with food to have in and of itself.
Yeah.
Because I'm not enjoying anything. And I think the thing with feasting is like feasting, with friends and family, it's about fellowship and enjoyment. Like it's not wrong to enjoy food. It's not wrong to enjoy what you're eating and drinking. I for me, it's like hey, I've lost this enjoyment part of it because I was so focused on a goal. And so how do I regain that? Yeah. And so it's like kind of this just very different angle of it, but it's really kind of, to me, it's a similar discussion, which is I've lost sight of kind of what the meaning of all that stuff is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I as we're talking, talk about audacious, because I never want to exercise during the holidays. Holidays is just kind of like, I'm chilling, boy. I think I want to try to exercise. So let's keep each other accountable. You watch your eating, and I'll try to exercise.
He's been like trying to get you to fist bump him for a couple minutes.
You let me-
Am I committed now? Am I?
Hey, dude, you put yourself out on the podcast,
Okay,
man.
all
So
right.
that was
All
your
right.
accountability. Lynn, how do you want to grow? What's God teaching you right now in this moment?
Yeah. I do want to grow in gratefulness. Even last night in small group, we were talking and we started like looking at the forecast over the next 2 weeks. And the temperature starting to drop and we started complaining. And then I caught myself and I was like, we're complaining about a high of like 60, just like you catch yourself like being ridiculous. And I think I don't want to just, be content, like catch myself in a holiday season, realizing that I'm grumbling about something that's actually not a problem. I want that to be the posture all the time. And so can I, in this season where it's easy to be grateful and be like, think of the things I'm thankful for. Can I like set some rhythms or habits in this season that will be sustainable all the time and not just because it's Thanksgiving and because it's Christmas.
Right. So you do not like it getting colder?
I do not.
See, I don't like getting cold, but I love it to be cold during the holidays just because it's the holidays. It's supposed to be.
I don't want to see my breath outside.
Wow.
I don't want to wear a coat. If
Does
I can
anybody
just
else
wear a long
want it to be cold during the holidays?
Yeah, that's fat kid weather. See,
I wonder if this has something to do with the fact that the Christmas thing isn't like a real big ordeal for you.
Maybe. I just don't like cold.
Yeah, that's true.
Skinny people problems, Joey. She don't like cold.
But Merry Christmas. Here's our lead pastor. Thank you guys, and we'll see y'all next week.
Okay, people, tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., Santa's coming to town. Santa! Oh, my God!
Well, it's good to have you here, man.
Hey, I'm glad to be here.
I love in the sermon you said, at the very least, if you laugh today, laughing is good for the soul.
Listen, and if you don't laugh today, something might be wrong with you. Because I like that you called it a classic too, because my son and I were talking about this with songs, and he said, Dad, we were listening to Christmas music at the house. He goes, Dad, All I Want for Christmas Is You has to be the most famous Christmas song ever. Mariah Carey. And I was like, well, Miles, it's crazy that you're saying that, because that was written like when I was a teenager. I mean, that was written in my lifetime. And it's crazy to think like Elf, which came out, 2003, that we're starting to call them classics. And I guess you can tell when they make it through decades where there's still something like our family watches Elf every year.
Yeah.
I guess that means it's becoming a classic.
Yep.
I don't know if your old school Christmas Story people might not like that. But,
yeah, it's crazy. I remember hearing about the movie Elf setting up at our West Campus when we were at the theater, setting up for a youth group. You remember John T. Fuller, old school name?
Yeah.
And he was telling me, dude, it is the funniest movie I've ever seen. And I was like, I got to go see it. Will Ferrell. That's when it came out. Yeah. And then I remember showing up to work as a senior in high school, and my boss was like, have you heard this Mariah Carey Christmas?
Right.
How insane is that? Hey, I wanted to ask you, especially as our lead pastor, when we have done At the Movies series in the past, do you ever have people reaching out or writing the church saying, come on, man, like I came to hear, an accurate presentation of the gospel or something? What is all this movie stuff? Yeah,
we do. And, to be fair, if it's not your favorite series that we do at Seacoast, I don't have a problem with that. It's some people would rather that we go through books of the Bible, which we do. Oftentimes we'll go through a book of the Bible. But for me, so I understand the criticism, and I understand it's not for everybody. And honestly, there have been some years where I've been like, I'm just not feeling it, and we haven't done it. But to me, the flip side of that, where I have met so many people that will tell me, hey, my first time at Seacoast was during an At the Movie series. Somebody invited me to come to it. And so obviously this series, our goal is really to reach people that we may not reach otherwise. It's using something from culture to get their attention. And then we're not doing a message on Elf. If you go over, you're not going to hear a sermon about Elf, but we'll we're doing a message on the Bible that Elf helps to illustrate in different ways. And so, but yeah, I get it. And, everybody's wired a little bit differently. And if you don't love this series, it's only going to last for 4 weeks, and then we'll be back to other stuff that you can love. So
yeah, and I'm with you. I get it as well, and I remember hearing a lot of that stuff. It was the week that we covered the movie The Greatest Showman, because we started with a very theatrical presentation of a song that was in the movie, and there were costumes and all of that, and it actually really made me think hard, and because I was like, well, how do I feel about this? And I really thought, I was like, okay, so if you're upset about this, again, I'm with you. I understand the pushback, but I was like, then you're basically saying that art, smiling and laughing, just doesn't belong in the church. It's almost like you've got things too categorized. Like, I think God really likes art, and we just spent 5 minutes celebrating art, basically.
Yeah, we did. And this could be something you want to cut off of this episode, but I do think it's interesting to think about different methods that the church uses, or could or should or shouldn't use, to present the gospel and to reach people. And I think on one extreme, you've got like the sola scriptura people that are like, just read the word, preach the gospel, don't add any stories, don't add any of that. And then you've got like, I think what could be gimmicky or like people that would just go like, man, that could eventually even become manipulation, where you're like really trying to play with people's emotions. And I think our prayer is to always land like on, we want to teach the Bible, we want to preach the gospel, but we want to use illustrations. Sometimes that's illustrations out of our own lives. Sometimes that might be a movie clip like what we're doing right now, or it could be a prop that helps maybe somebody understand something. But hopefully not to take it so far that we're being gimmicky or we're being, and so I think it's an interesting conversation. And I think that there are some churches that probably would go way further on some of that stuff. And then there are other churches that would think what we're doing is, radically different and maybe and so I think it's good discussion. My son and his generation, I think it's interesting. Maybe it's just his friendship circle, but kind of struggles with us doing, special music or doing, like, why would we do that, Dad? And it creates great conversation to kind of go, man, we want to teach the Bible, but we also want to reach people. And Jesus was a master storyteller. And we read the parables now as like the Bible. It's something we grew up with. But if you were in his context and time, like he would answer a question that somebody had asked by going on a completely different direction, seemingly telling this story about a guy who had a servant who did this and that and that, and then at the end he kind of turns it around to like answer the question. And so there's no doubt in my mind that he used story and art to connect with people, and so this is our version, our attempt at using the parables of our day, if you will, the movies that have really resonated in our culture, to point people back to something that is a biblical truth that is connected to that film.
Well, Elf, I love this movie. I found some tidbits that I wanted to share with our listenership. First of all, one part of the movie that just gets me every time, and I feel like it hasn't really caught on with our culture, but I love when the store manager is like, 6 inches, like just how he says it and how perturbed he is. So then or is it 6? I forget, 3 inch, 2 inches, something like that. But yeah, the Zoe, her character, what was her name? Jovi. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. She's just like, that's impossible. But I thought that I read this one time and I just thought it was hilarious that a lot of the reactions that you see in New York City to Will Ferrell in his costume are legit reactions, because nobody came out there and said, hey, we're filming a movie. And so people are seeing this life-size elf. And so it actually caused some minor traffic accidents in real life. People like, what in the world?
Of course it did.
And then the movie A Christmas Story, the Red Ryder BB gun one, the main character, Ralphie, with the BB gun, he is in Elf. He is Ming Ming, who is the elf manager that's kind of trying to be nice, but super alarmed with the number of extra sketches that Will Ferrell was able to put together. So that's Ralphie from The Christmas Story.
Wow, I didn't know that. Yeah. Now we know.
There you go. Well, you said in your sermon that this is a message about how easy it is to doubt and how important it is for us to believe again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically a message about belief, unbelief.
Well, really, I think one of the things that always struck me about this movie, other than it being hilarious, but is this childlike innocence that you have with Buddy, and then contrasting that with his dad, who is like this corporate bigwig, serious, all about work and all of that stuff, and obviously their belief is in Santa Claus, but I think you see some similarities in his dad of just what unbelief can do for us. Like nobody wants to be a cynic, but I think life has its way. The older you get and the more you experience of, like, I don't know, we can tend towards being cynical or losing faith, losing innocence. And I think it has real ramifications in our lives. And so that was one of the things that, as I rewatched it through the lens of like teaching it to our church, it's like, man, I want to always be the kind of people who are stirring up faith in people versus like stirring up unbelief.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I, reading through your sermon, preparing for this conversation, I mean, anytime this verse is used, it just catches my attention because it's one of my favorite verses. And this message, it's to people like me. I think it's funny how sometimes people will say about churches like us, and we won't get into this because I have my own opinions, but we need to go deeper and this sort of thing. I mean, this verse, I've been a Christian my whole life, and I constantly need that reminder and that challenge of, dude, don't get lost in your thoughts. Like when you approach God, you still have to become a child. And I'll just read the verse: unless you turn from your sins and become like little children, you will never get into the kingdom of heaven. But you say the real tragedy is when we lose our innocence and our simple faith. It robs us of our joy and separates us from God. I was curious, do you think when we fall into doubts and we say things like, man, I just have so many questions, I just don't know if I can believe, do you think God is sometimes like, yeah, but you don't even need to ask these questions? It's almost like, hey, y'all are humans. And I'm not saying questions are bad, but I'm not asking you to ask these questions.
Yeah. It's an interesting conversation because when I say like we should be like children and like we want to be people who believe, what I'm not saying is that don't ever doubt. I'm saying that I think the difference between adults and kids is that kids ask the questions about their doubts. Kids ask like, Dad, why is the sky blue? Dad, why, who invented God? Like my kids have challenged me with some pretty awesome questions. And so I think you can be childlike and still have questions, but their questions are coming from a place of like wanting to seek understanding versus, and again, I don't love this because I don't want to be that church. It's like anybody who asks a question has a questioning spirit. But
right.
I think there is a difference between asking a question from a place of childlike faith and asking a question based on like a cynic that's like almost like a jury trying to prove. I mean, the Pharisees asked Jesus a lot of questions that were really in order to try to trap him or trick him or whatever. And that's just a different kind of a question than like childlike question.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyways, I think, there are a lot of questions we ask that God is probably like, yeah, you have no framework to even be able to understand this because you're human and you don't see it from my perspective. But I think that I would like to think he loves to see his kids leaning into him, and like doubt, I think when handled appropriately, and when we do, when we doubt well, it usually is going to lead us to a place of greater belief and understanding versus just like, shoving it into a corner and not talking about it. So.
Yeah. And I want to say I heard a pastor use this analogy, and it's always hit home for me, and I go back to it often, is Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. They had the tree of life that they could eat till their heart's content, but then the tree of knowledge of good and evil. I kind of see that in the same light in my current day. Like there is a tree of knowledge of good and evil that we've all been exposed to because of the fall, but I have an opportunity, being someone who has accepted Christ, and I know the truth that lives inside of me. I don't have to eat from that tree.
Yeah.
I can eat from the tree of life. Now, Joey goes back to that tree often because that's how my mind works, but I have to remind myself, go back to the tree of life.
I think that's great. I think it's great. Another example that kind of stands out to me, even this time of the year as we're moving into the Christmas season, is, when you had Mary, who had an angel show up to her and say, "Hey, you're going to have a baby, and God is the dad," and then you had Zechariah, an angel showed up to him and said, "Hey, your wife's going to have a baby." He was in his older age, and they both asked questions.
Right.
Like they both had like a, wait a minute, how is this going to be? Mary's question, I think, I won't get it verbatim, but was like, how could this be? And Zechariah's was more of a,
get out of here.
Get out of here. Like this, this isn't, I don't believe this can happen. And it's just interesting. They both had questions, but one was a question that was still had undergirded by belief. And the other one was like, just I don't think you can do this. And, Zechariah ends up getting struck deaf and all that stuff. And both of them ended up having the baby. God's will ended up happening either way. And obviously, Zechariah's story is redeemed in the end, and he names his son, John, and all of that stuff. But I think you've got like this contrast of like, I believe, God, anything's possible with you. I don't understand how, but I'm going to trust you with it, versus like almost playing God, like, no, God, I'm too old. This is why this can't happen. This is, and so I want to always err. I know, like you said, Josh can tend towards the tree of knowledge and evil. I'll tend towards doubt at times, but this movie again is a reminder of like, man, I want to be as childlike as I can be, and remember that God is so much bigger than I am. And just because I don't understand something doesn't mean that He's not at work in it, or that He doesn't have control and doesn't have an answer for it, even if I can't understand it.
I hope in heaven we can not only have sense of humor, but we can still kind of joke around with each other. Because I love the thought of being like in a circle where Jesus and Zechariah, and we can be like, Zechariah, be careful now, ask him a question
right,
now.
exactly.
Be careful now.
He's going to be deaf and dumb again.
Hey, so you're the elf's dad, which I watched the Godfather movies later in life and realized that he's one of the sons, which I thought was, your dad's a big Godfather fan. So you talked about how unbelief, and just correct me if I'm getting any of this wrong, but unbelief can cause exhaustion, emptiness, and enslavement. I'd love for you to kind of unpack that here on the podcast.
Yeah. I mean, and again, I'm pulling these things from Scripture, but also from the movie. And I think like if the exhaustion piece of it is when I don't believe that there is a God who is at work in this world. Romans 8:28 says that God works all things together for the good of those who love Him and are called according to His purposes, that I will tend to try to do things on my own or do things in my own power. And I mean, and I do it both ways. Still to this day, as a pastor, there are days I get it wrong, but when I am walking into maybe a heavy day at work or even a tough situation in my home, and I'm like, and again, it's not that I make a conscious decision, I don't believe in God today, I'm going to do things in my own strength, but it's almost like, I think it's Craig Rochelle wrote a book, and did a series of messages called Practical Atheists. Yeah. And it was like, we believe in our mind in things, but the way we live our lives is as if we are atheists. And there are times where I am living my life in my own power, trying to solve problems on my own, versus that simple step of going, okay, God, I know that you're involved. I know that you're in control. I know that you have wisdom to bear on this situation that I need right now. And I'm just positioning myself to say, I'm dependent on you. I need you. And I'm going to operate within that. And even just the mindset difference of going into it is like, okay, I don't have to fix all of this on my own. I don't have to do this on my own. And I can be seeking Him. And so I think that's where the exhaustion piece comes. The emptiness piece, I think just speaks to really the bigger picture in life of like, I do believe, and maybe this sounds really old school, but I believe that we were all made in the image of God. that whether you know him, whether you've ever heard about him, whether you maybe even have had some experiences and you would say, I hate God, or I hate that. I think we were all made with this God-sized hole in our heart, if you will. And again, that's the old school kind of, evangelist way of saying it, but of like, man, there's something in us that is drawn to be a part of. I think it's Ecclesiastes says that God has planted eternity in the human heart, that there's like something in us that longs for more than this life and longs for more than what we kind of bring to the table on our own. And I think that if we choose to live a life of saying, you know what, I'm not going to believe, I'm going to do it on my own. I believe that there is this kind of emptiness, and it's this great equalizer in conversations that you can even speak to people. They go, man, isn't there something though that you long for, that God has put, that we want more? And so I think that I don't want to be a person that lives a life that ignores that, that lives without that. And I believe that the power of God, the Holy Spirit at work in us is the opposite. There's a fullness that comes with living with him. And again, it's not that I'm better than somebody else, it's just that I feel like I'm living a life of purpose and a life of fullness. Again, Jesus said it in John 10, the thief came to steal, kill, and destroy, but I've come to give you life and life abundantly. And I think everybody wants that, even if you don't know how to say it, even if you don't have the theology for it, that when we choose to live in unbelief, I think it's just going to ultimately become more of a factor in our life of this emptiness that we're longing for. And what was the third one?
So the third one was enslavement, and you got the perfect stuff out of the movie, because it really is an unbelievable contrast between Buddy and his dad. Because Buddy is just like, life is just awesome. I love people. Oh, you're leaving the elevator, I forgot to give you a hug. I mean, it's just like it's contagious. I really think that is partly why everybody loves that movie, because it's just like he's just so happy. He's just so funny. It's just so much fun to take this in. But enslavement. And his dad really was enslaved.
He was enslaved to like the rat race of making money and being successful.
Didn't even want to eat with his family. Just missing out on all the good stuff.
But don't we all get sucked into some version of that or another? I mean, we can be enslaved by other people's expectations. It doesn't have to be about money. In his case, it was like this. We all know somebody, and some of us may even be there, where we feel like we're enslaved to a drive for success by other people's standards. And it's, again, that old cliche of like, I don't want to climb to the top of the ladder and realize that it was on the wrong building, and like that I was just enslaved to like this cultural pull towards more, where Jesus is like, man, when I hear him talk about like the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head at night, there's one part of me that hears scriptures like that and is like, man, should I feel bad for having a house and having a bed and some of that stuff? But I think what's behind ultimately is he wasn't a slave to any of that stuff. Like he was free to move to a new city if God called him to go there. He didn't have like the material stuff holding him down. And so anyways, I think that again, I want to be the kind of person who lives by faith. It's like if my God is telling me to go somewhere, to take a step, I want to be the kind of person that can have full confidence that he's going to meet with me there. Yeah. He's going to provide for me there. He's going to, and sadly, many times, even me, I'm just being transparent. I feel like, man, there is a gravitational pull to the things that we've accumulated, or to the safety nets that we've provided for ourselves that can ultimately become enslaving. And then obviously there are examples at the extremes where what seems like freedom, pursuing whether it's alcohol or substance or whatever, like the enemy loves to allure us with freedom, but then ultimately trap us with addiction, or with kind of becoming a slave to that thing that we thought ultimately would bring us freedom. And so I think there's ultimate freedom in Christ, and as we move towards our faith and towards our belief, I believe we'll experience more freedom in all of those areas.
Yeah. All right. The best way to spread Christmas cheer is singing loud for all to hear. You tied this into, if you haven't seen the movie Elf, you don't know what I'm talking about, but you tied this into worship being a weapon. And I'll tell you what an important reminder for me. Like I go to God, talk to him during the day. And for sure, I mean, prayer for me as, especially lately with some health stuff going on in our family and everything, it's like a desperation, like, Lord, just please help, please be with us, please give us peace and all that sort of thing. But I rarely just say, you know what? I'm just going to worship. And so how does that unfold in your life? So you're having a really bad day. It just seems like nothing went well, heavy-hearted. When you do this right and when you use worship as your weapon, like what does it look like? I mean, do you get in your car and just say, you know what? I'm not going to think about all this stuff. I'm going to focus my thoughts on God.
Yeah, and obviously we're talking in this particular example about
because your dad says that he just listens to country music,
which
you're
I'm
more
good
holier
with too.
than him.
I'm good with too. I think, and that's what I was going to say. We're talking about the music side of worship because we could have a whole conversation about worship as a way of life and all that stuff. But I mean, there is no doubt that music is powerful. And forget worship for a second. Like when I walk into my home at night and let's say Lisa's home and she's cooking or whatever, she's always got music on. And I can tell a lot about what kind of mood she's in or what frame of mind she's in based on what she's playing. I mean, it's sometimes in our home, Chris Stapleton is a staple at times. And it's just kind of this like easygoing, like a little bit country, a little bit rock. And I can just kind of tell that she's in an easygoing mood. But for
sometimes you walk in there she's playing Metallica.
If she's playing Metallica, it's been a special kind of a day for her. But for me, like what it looks like in my home when I am like overwhelmed by life, I will try to, and again, I don't always get this right. It helps that I preach. And there are times where I'm struggling to get my message or I'm feeling overwhelmed with it. And I'll just put on worship, maybe while I'm taking a shower or while I'm getting ready in the morning, just blast worship music. And it doesn't always affect me in the same way, but usually after a few minutes of being in worship, my mindset is changing. My, like, just even belief, like going back to the belief thing, like I'm beginning to remember how big God is in light of, my problems. And what usually happens for us is our problems get bigger and our God gets smaller. He doesn't actually get smaller, but the way that we see him gets smaller. And so worship just helps to flip that script and just remind me. And usually, again, if they're good songs, they're based in some spiritual truth, some scripture, and you're just listening and then singing and proclaiming these things over and over again. And it changes your mindset. I mean, you look at Buddy again, and he's in the toy store and he's singing all these songs. It's like it impacts his mood. And I think that's true of any music per se. It's powerful. They say that Lucifer, Satan, was the music leader in heaven, and like there is something powerful about music and the way that it can impact our mood, our outlook, our mindset. And so if I know it's got power, I'd rather utilize that power for worship to take me to a place of expanding my belief versus shrinking it. Yeah.
That there's somewhat of a more recent CeCe Winans song, God We Believe.
Yeah. So
that's kind of my.
This is
which the Winans are friends of the family, by the way. No big deal.
Your family?
No big deal.
Well, I was just getting ready to say, but you already did. Just for the podcast listeners, I got to meet her.
Really?
Maybe a month or two ago.
Wow.
At like an event, a smaller event.
I wish I would have known because I would have loved for you to say, hey, do you know the Craven family? So that's my mom's maiden name. And there's BB sang at my grandpa's funeral.
Wow.
And,
so her son is a church planter.
Okay.
And in Nashville, Tennessee. And I was at a gathering with some church planters and he was there and then she showed up. It was her birthday. We got to eat some birthday cake.
Yeah,
so
that's cool.
I'm kind of a big deal. I don't know if you guys knew that or not.
But, well, I met CeCe way before you did.
You did. You did. I should have dropped your name.
So people who have, getting back to the belief deal, people who've lost their faith, they don't believe anymore. I'm curious, your years of pastoring, when people come back to God, and I'm kind of asking this, I think the right word would be rhetorically, like I think I know the answer. It's usually not, something just intellectually clicked, Josh, and I just put the dots together and now I believe. Like usually it's God does something, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. And
And I think why that's so important is, and obviously as believers, for sure, it would bother us if somebody loses their faith. But I think sometimes we see them as bad people, like oh well, that's bad. Like you shouldn't be doing that. But when we think about what brings them back is kind of an act of God. It kind of flips that around a little
Yeah.
bit. Like I rarely meet people who've lost faith who wanted to lose their faith.
right.
It's kind of like, I want to believe, man. It helped me with my unbelief, which we'll get to that verse. But
Yeah, I think so. And I even think about like the prodigal son, even and the reason I bring that example up is because he actually proactively like, give me my inheritance. I want to go. But what's interesting is that the father could see in him that it was. When he comes back after he's blown it all and he gets to the end, he kind of finally gets to his senses as he's getting ready to eat from the pig's trough, and he decides to go back. And the father's heart, and again, I think the father's representative of God in that case. Jesus tells that story to show us the father's heart. He runs to him, and it was the
not
love,
even knowing what he's home
no,
for. He could have been
before
back
he
for
could
more
give
money.
his speech,
Yeah.
before runs to him, and it was the love of the father running to him that really broke him and got him to this place of like, man, receiving that. And so, yeah, I think we're all on a journey, and we all have these moments, whether they're big crises of faith or maybe mini crises of faith, and it's ultimately, I think, part of our journey of seeking Him and of trying to understand who He is. And it's been fun to watch it in my kids, because I just want my kids to have I don't know about you, but I want them to have a up and to the right relationship with God. I don't want to have any moments where, but then I look at my own journey, and it was like, man, if I hadn't had those low moments, or those moments where I tried to fill that emptiness with the wrong things, and it kind of led me to really see and understand where that took me, there's no way I would have the depth of faith that I have today if it weren't for those seeking moments, and sometimes seeking in the wrong places, and finding my way, and God ultimately like reaching me where my mom and dad couldn't have done, or the people that loved me and cared about me, they couldn't have orchestrated the circumstances that God did to get a hold of my heart. And so, yeah, I'm with you. It's Him that does the reaching, and now we have to respond to His love and take that step of towards Him. But it's really one step towards Him, but He's done all the heavy lifting to make a way for us to get there.
Yeah, so it's in Mark chapter 9. After the boy's father further explained his son's condition, he said to Jesus, "If you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." And Jesus assured the man that everything is possible for one who believes. Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." And I just want to ask you, if somebody asked you that question, dude, I'm trying to believe, man. How do I overcome? Such and such happened. Like, why would that happen, man? If there's a God that truly loves people, I'm having a hard time, Josh. How do I overcome my unbelief?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing I would say is like, that's probably the first step, is just acknowledging it. Because I think we're so tempted to fake it, or to try to give the answer that we think we're supposed to give, but just saying, hey, I've got faith, but I've also got a lot of doubt right now. I've got a lot of, and I just am convinced that God's not afraid of those doubts. I'm convinced that like Jesus wasn't offended. Like, do you know I'm the Son of God? Like, what are you talking about your unbelief? It's like, man, that's real. And
how much water do I have to turn into wine?
Right, exactly. But Thomas, who gets the bad rap of being doubting Thomas, like he gets to this point where he's like, the disciples are all talking about Jesus' resurrection, and they're all excited. He showed up, and he's just like at this point where his heart is almost closed off. He's like, guys, I can't go there. Like I can't get excited again about Jesus being the Son of God and all that, and then it's almost like you see him protecting himself because he's so worried about being hurt. And what does Jesus do for him? Like Thomas is like, I need to see scars. I need to see, and Jesus is like, hey,
okay,
I'll meet you there. I'll meet you in your questions. And I think if we'll ask them honestly, acknowledge our doubt, I just believe that God's going to meet you in your place of where you're stuck, your place where and if I were him, I know how I would do it, but I'm not. And so I've kind of learned the longer I'm in this, I'm not going to even try to like answer those questions for you, or like I'm just going to encourage you to be as honest as you can. Take them to God. I'll help you process, where I can, but I just believe that Jesus was the only one who could point to a scar, and help him get through where he was. And so anyways, I would just say that the most important step is being honest with your unbelief and asking God to meet you where you are.
Yeah.
And of course that kid ends up getting healed.
Right. I wonder too, because I'm thinking obviously as a pastor myself, and then you being the lead pastor of a big church, like if we're not careful, it may just be a natural thing. It feels like unbelief for guys like us, it feels heavier because people are looking to us for guidance. And I think it's important for us to say, hey, I've been where you are sort of thing, or maybe I'm currently, struggling in some things, but I almost feel like we need to normalize across the board for people who love their pastors and for pastors, normalize, hey, pastors struggle with unbelief too.
Yeah.
Almost like let your pastors off the hook. Let them be humans. They've answered a call, but it does not mean they're above the same sort of stuff you're all struggling with.
Yeah. I've had a few friends, and I know you've gone on your own journey as well of kind of just asking deeper questions about the faith. And but I've got a few friends, one of them in particular I'm thinking of, that actually ended up getting let go at the church that he worked at because he went through a season of asking questions. And when I see him now, he's actually now leading a church that's huge and doing a great job. His questions ultimately landed him on solid ground. He just felt a little shaky at times along the way. And I think that it's human nature to want to control things and want to, feel like we've got, but I just feel like even in the guy who came to Jesus and was like, man, your disciples, like they tried to cast the steam out. They couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like they were let down by these guys, but it ultimately led them to go straight to Jesus, the source himself. And I think my hope as a pastor is I know I'm going to let people down. I know that I'm human. I know I'm going to, miss it. And I've got people, even right now, as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking like, I know they're disappointed because I haven't called them back yet, or because I haven't been. And so my hope is that we're always like trying to serve people well, represent him well, but ultimately point them to him and go, man, ultimately God is the only one that can answer that question or meet that need or get to that place. And I want to, again, that's not an excuse to not call people back, but I'm just in a season right now. I've got a number of friends that are in crisis working through different things. And I feel like I can't be everything that they want me or need me to be in this crisis, but I know, and I'm hoping, I'm praying that God is going to meet them where they are to help them through, whether that's unbelief or just the crisis situation that they're walking through.
Yeah.
But I don't think, you've said this before, I don't think people need or want their pastors to be superheroes. I think they want them to be human, and hopefully be a good example of a fellow struggler who's working their way through this fallen world and trying to point people to Christ and point themselves to Christ. Always be growing, always be, practicing what we preach, if you will, but not trying to pretend like we're perfect. And that's part of what I love about this church, is that I've never felt like I have to. When we went through marriage crises that we've talked about on this podcast, this church is what helped us get through it, and there are times that we're helping others through theirs, but there's no expectation that any of us are perfect or aren't going to walk through our own struggles.
Yeah. So is Elf an every year sort of movie for the Surratt family?
Most years we watch Elf. Yeah. It's funny. Our kids are now the ones that are like, I'm getting tired of that.
Really?
And Lisa and I are like, what?
Really?
We got to watch Elf. We also do, we got this from Jenna, but it's popcorn. What is it? Popcorn something and Polar Express.
Yeah.
Maybe pie. But there's Polar Express is another one.
Nice.
Not doing it this year. Maybe it'll show up in the future at the movies. But for me, Elf, Will Ferrell, I'm immature. I grew up in the 90s, Anchorman and, Talladega Nights, like just that was like true comedy to me growing up. And so Elf's a staple for me.
So thank you for being here in the studio.
Awesome.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
You've been listening to the Things You Won't Hear on Sunday Seacoast podcast. In the show notes, you'll see a link to our Facebook group page. Also, we'd love for you to consider subscribing so you get these episodes downloaded right when they come out. Thanks so much for listening.